Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Periodic Conversations. My name is Sarah Birmingham, and today I'm sitting with Alexis Zacharko. Alexis is by day, she's a social media manager. For the past 5 years, she's worked alongside the cannabis industry and values the plant for its balancing properties. She is also a huge fan of photography and capturing life's moments in cinematic ways. In her spare time, she enjoys playing video games and spending time in the mountains.
Love it.
I must say that I really love all your photography and also your modeling photos.
Thank
If you guys haven't seen Alexis's Instagram, you need to go follow her or go take a look at what she's got because it is incredible. And it's just so artistic as well, and just the varieties that you have.
you.
Yeah,
I literally always have a hard time. I can't pick a theme for anything, so it is very all over the place, but
it's
I love just
beautiful.
getting creative.
What is your Instagram again? Do you mind just telling?
THCA2Z with the number 2. And
So today, Alexis and I are going to discuss stigmatization, sorry, of meds in all forms, antidepressants to cannabis.
yay, my favorite topic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you do have such a passion about cannabis, which I also find very intriguing as well. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it.
Amazing. Yeah. I honestly, personally, it all comes back to a history of using it myself, of working in the cannabis industry, of having mental health challenges. And I was fortunate enough to work in community engagement for almost 2 years. And I met so many people and got to attend so many local events and different organizations and seeing so many different facets of how it impacts people and sort of where where mental health is sort of lost in the system. Uh, has made me want to even talk about it more, and it makes it less of a bad topic to talk about. I think a lot of the times we're like, oh yeah, talk about it. It's totally fine to talk about it. But when it comes to yourself actually facing it, you're like, oh, but not for me. It's fine for you guys to talk about it, but like I'm fine. So
Yeah, yeah. It seems
it's
to be that
it's
we
nice to open it up.
definitely, which we will today as well. I've already thought about it, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'll share a couple more things about myself than I normally would. But you know what? It's great for people to actually hear from personal experiences, say about antidepressants or cannabis, I guess what your own personal experiences are with them.
Yeah. So I've been smoking cannabis since early days of university, not nearly as long as some people, actually not even like midway through university. I know some people start when they're like in high school. But I didn't discover the plant until about halfway through university. I tried it and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never felt relaxed in my life. I realized that I've always been operating on like level 20, and I was after I consumed the plant, it felt like everything was on a normal operating level. Like I know some people tend to feel very like taken down by it, and I find these days I have a lot more knowledge with it. But at the time, I was like, wow, is this what it feels like to operate on a functioning level? And so I used that quite often, and then graduated university, went into the corporate world, and corporate is a lot to deal with. And it was in corporate that I ended up having a complete mental breakdown,
Mm.
couldn't sleep for a week. I realized a lot of people aren't very helpful when you're going through that. There is so much of that that has to be just done, and society almost expects you to just keep going, even though you're like, I haven't slept in a week and keep having panic attacks and I don't know why. Um, and even at those points while I was discovering the panic attacks and the anxiety, a lot of people would blame it on my cannabis consumption. And I was like, I don't know how to tell you, but this is the only thing that's helping me right now. At the time, I consumed a lot of CBD versus THC. Like, I'd be on the phone having a panic attack trying to explain to an attendant the difference between THC and CBD because they were immediately jumping to it being my cannabis consumption. And so once that was all sort of figured out, I was able to talk. My doctor was really great at the time. Went through a bajillion, it felt like a bajillion. I feel like if you name a brand of antidepressant, I've tried it. I've gone through so many different ones until I found the ones that work for me. Of
Mhm.
course, they only work for so long sometimes, and you do have to change them.
As many people
Um,
go through as well. You aren't alone on that front. Yeah.
it feels like I love the joke where it's like doctors are really just like the weed dude, where it's like you haven't found the right strain yet, bro, because that's really what it was.
Oh my gosh.
But it was funny because as soon as I had it all figured out and I felt normal on the drugs, all of a sudden I was like, oh, we're fine. We're good. We're like gonna take these for like 6 months and then we're fine. We're done. It's like antibiotics. You just take it and then you're done with it. And at the time when it was all unfolding, I didn't realize how much I had like put it off when I was growing up because I didn't have like there wasn't an overwhelming amount of stuff going on in my life that I wasn't able to manage it all. So I was just kind of like shoving it under. And then B, I didn't realize that it wasn't something that just you've come to it. You're like, oh, I have this, I fixed it, done. It's not just, I mean, even if you break a leg, you still deal with that some sort of like impacts of it through your whole life. And I don't think we talk about mental health in that same way. And we sort of make it seem like your meds are like a crutch almost. And like if you fix yourself to the point, like then you're good and you don't need them anymore. And we sort of talk about them as like being helpful until you're good. You're using them to like help you out. And we don't really talk about the fact that sometimes your brain just doesn't produce enough serotonin on its own. Sometimes genetically, that's just how it is. Since I've started antidepressants, pretty much almost everyone else in my immediate family is also on them too. It's clearly something that not just like you can yoga your way out of it. I think there's tools you can use to help mitigate a lot of the side effects or any of the like severe issues you might be dealing with, but it's not like meds or something that just go away because you figured out how to not have a panic attack, essentially. And that's something that took me a really long time to learn because I kept trying to like, I was like, I'm done. Like, the pandemic hit, I decided to stop taking my meds because I was like, I don't think they're doing anything anymore. I like stopped taking them. The pandemic hit and my panic attacks are coming back. And I went to my doctor. He's like, what happened? I was like, I'm gonna stop taking the meds. I'm sorry. He's like, you can't just stop taking them. Um, but at the time, so many people would come up to me and even be like, oh, like you're on those for now. And it's not like I'm probably going to have to take my meds for life, essentially. Like it's not something that just goes away.
I get where you're coming from, but I also have a different perspective in the sense that,
Oh,
yeah, I believe that you can get off of medication, but it takes a lot of
really?
work. And for example, Dr. Joe Dispenza, he has a story about a woman who um, was taking medications for everything. She ended up getting diagnosed with cancer, and she had all these different things that were happening to her, and she was able to get off quite a few different medications, but they weren't antidepressants necessarily. She stayed on those, but she had tons of other medications that she was on. But the way that she got off of them was starting with, first and foremost, meditating and spending more time working on herself and in herself. So starting with her mind and actually taking that time to listen to herself. I think a lot of us are on medications because of how fast paced our society is. So
Oh, yeah.
for me, like when I think about it, I think that, oh, well, I can get off my medication if I moved to Mexico and lived hybrid, like off my laptop, and just, I guess not hybrid, fully on my laptop. And
Well, yeah.
yeah, but it's, you know what, when I was in South America and I was there for 6 months, I was fine without them. And then, I come back and I go to school and I get a full-time job, almost full-time, and then in school and I get a cat, and just like doing things times 100. And then now, the stress and the anxiety starts to come back in. And I think that we don't take enough time for ourselves in those days, in those moments where we could be meditating and taking more time just to center ourselves. Because I think it's a lack of being centered. But also on the flip side, I want to clarify, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not saying get off your medication. I'm on medication. I take mood stabilizers and as well as ADHD medication. So I am an advocate in the sense that it works really well for me. But in the same instance, I do believe, like, for example, one of my girlfriends recently got off her medications and she did a massive detox with
Yeah.
and she's fine. So, and you know what? Like, great for her. And I feel so happy for her. But different medications are meant for different people, different circumstances, and we're all individuals and we're all very different. So, what works for
Oh
one
yeah.
person will not work for another. And that's something that I just want to remind everybody about with this podcast. Don't go making any irrational decisions right away. And also always consult your doctor first and foremost. With my psychiatrist, she's very good. And she also makes it noted that with medications, you have to take them consistently. And it's because you need those
Oh
consistent
yeah.
levels within yourself to produce the same amount of serotonin and dopamine so that you're moving at the same pace rather than, you forget to take them or you just stop taking them because you're like, it's fine. When lots of people will say that you
Oh
need to,
yeah.
yeah, right. And you need to wean off of them as well. That's huge. And being able to have medical help with that or somebody supporting you with those motions, if you feel inclined to make those choices for yourself, definitely there's so many options out there for that. But always reaching out for help, and not to mention, if you have a consistent therapist, that also helps as well. And they
Oh
can see
yeah.
your levels and see where you're at and see, how you're doing, and help advise you in the right way in those arenas. But there is a stigma behind taking medications.
Yes. Oh, I
And
do agree, like everything you said too. Like
okay.
it, like I think too much in society we just cover things up a lot of the time. Doctors don't have enough time to properly diagnose you. Therapists are sometimes too expensive for people, and so they end up on these meds as like a band-aid. And it
Mhm.
is very rare. Like I think I was fortunate to have a doctor that was like, no, you're not taking Ativan every day. Like we're getting this solved. Like we're giving you something that's an actual solution. But I mean, that's how the opioid crisis did start. So it is fair to say
Yeah.
that like maybe we are getting diagnosed too many blanket diagnoses, and like too many drugs. I think, especially for me, like I had my whole breakdown when I was working extreme corporate, like didn't have a day off ever. It was the most toxic work environment of like everyone should
Yeah.
be working 24/7 if you're not working 24/7. So yeah, I do agree there is that balance that needs to be met. Like some people I probably will need my meds all the time because I don't think my body knows how to make serotonin, but I definitely still needed to make changes. Like I couldn't just keep going at my life the same way I was, or else I would be on a lot more drugs probably in
Yeah.
order to keep moving at 1,000. Like we forget to tell people to stop too. Like it is a whole encompassing change that you do have to make.
Mhm.
Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
take your meds off suddenly, but if it does feel like they're not helping you, then it really should be a choice that people have in determining what ultimately makes them feel best. I think the biggest thing is what makes you feel best, or is it what you feel like you should do because someone told you? I think is the
Mhm.
biggest factor.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, making that choice with proper advice as well
Mm-hmm.
is very important.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
too that I
Don't.
wanted to touch on is, yes, marketing and PR, you're working 24/7. So,
Yes.
generally
I am
speaking, in
fortunate.
corporate.
Yeah. I now work with a local company and they're very good about work-life balance. And
Amazing.
it's night and day. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, no wonder people burn out constantly. How can we expect someone to go? I just remember the ridiculous KPIs I had to reach. KPIs are also the most ridiculous concept. It's just like easier way to manage people than actually caring about the person themselves is like, what's your key performance indicator? What measurement can you reach that you are worthy in this capitalist society?
Mm.
And we all burn out because people expect you to be on call 24/7 in those environments. And at the end of the day, you become a number to them. And if your number isn't making them enough money, then they're just going to be like, bye.
Yeah.
And yeah,
That goes back to
it's,
our fast-paced society.
yeah.
100%. North Americans are known for having the highest amount of depression. It is because of what we put in our foods, how we live
Oh
our
yeah.
lives, how we're expected to run at full capacity 100% of the time. And it's unfortunate, but the biggest factor is that we can make choices to make a change in those arenas.
Yes.
We can spend time in our days to take time to be silent, journal about our problems, seek help. Like therapists are really huge for that, and
Hmm.
just
And
being
there's a
sure that
lot
we're
of like
yeah.
alternatives that I feel like people don't realize. They see the word therapist and they're like, oh my gosh, that's like $200 sessions. I don't have capacity for that.
Mhm.
With society, like there are nonprofit organizations that do pay what you can rates that, or
Mhm.
they'll base the rate off. It's out there. They may not be as like, I think a lot of them are like one-off sessions. You can't necessarily book with the same therapist every single time, but it is something,
Mhm.
rather than just sitting there and just stuck in your head and your thoughts. It's really great to actually be able to reach out, and it's not always unattainable. It's not
Mhm.
perfect yet, but it is slowly getting there.
Yeah, something too that I want to give advice on is sometimes it's nice to reach out to somebody who isn't a friend or a family because they don't have preconceived notions about you. And they're able to actually look at the circumstance and look at where you're at and what you're doing rather than saying, oh, well, like relating it back to say an ex-boyfriend or he did this to you, or I
Yeah.
don't know, your work is stressing you out too much. You need to change your job. Like actually giving the forefront to somebody who doesn't know you and saying, hey, so this is XYZ in my life. Now let's
Yeah.
figure out a path to properly work
Oh
on my
yeah.
mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, they're so necessary to like talk to someone that doesn't owe you. That like no one really owes you anything, but there's no like social guidelines with those people necessarily. They don't have to tell you that you did everything right. And I think that's important to have.
Hmm.
And I mean, no one's going to do everything right. So it's nice to have the objective opinion of somebody looking at you and being like, I am shocked, even just for validation sometimes, if you're doubting how much your certain feelings are impacting you, it's nice to have a third party person validate those and be like, no, that should affect you. That's
Hmm.
okay. We
Hmm.
can now work on that, which is huge. I think we hide a lot of it in norms most of
Hmm.
the time. How are you doing? Oh, good, thanks. Like,
Well, and it is what you're expected to do, right? Like you're always expected to have a smile on your face and to continue on with whatever you're doing with a positive attitude, which not every day can be like that.
no.
And we need to be able to come around the fact that that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite concepts that I've followed lately is like even plants, like flowers are not in bloom year round. They're never always going to be perfect
Mhm.
blooms. The only reason we see flowers that way is because we see them freshly cut from the grocery store being grown year round. But even plants cycle through, they lose their leaves. They like the flowers only last for like 4 to 8 weeks sometimes, and then they're gone for the season. Like you're not always
Mhm.
going to be on your top of your A game because sometimes you need to come close and shut down for a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually just described Taoism in a sense.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Didn't even realize I was.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, it's like the same thing with trees.
Yeah,
We're going to have storms that are going to move the trees, break some um, branches, and throw around some leaves. But at the end of the day, you're standing tall and you're there, and you're going to make it happen, whether or not you like it or not.
yep.
Yeah.
And you're all just working through it. Like we don't have to. I love crying in public. I just got like I feel like so many people are so taboo about that, but the amount of restaurants I've cried in and the waiter's like, "Are you good?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. Beautiful food. Thank you." And like your friends are there, you're crying with them. I think we hide so many things and so many not necessarily problems, like opportunities to connect with other people through smiling instead and being like, everything's fine, we're fine. When nobody's really that fine if you get down to it.
Yeah.
um, I think we should cry in public more and be more open about the not so pretty things that
Mhm.
happen.
That's so with Periodic, I'm starting a clothing line as well. And the clothing line is going to have serotonin or dopamine on the back of the shirts. And the idea is that if you see the represented logos and
Yeah,
you'll feel more inclined to talk to that person about mental health.
I love
So,
that.
so that's what I really want to do, is to be able to create a community where it's okay to not be okay, and to be able to talk
Yeah,
to somebody who, once again, does not have preconceived notions about you, but is empathetic and understanding enough that knows the brand and wants to have a discussion about mental health,
I
which
love that.
I agree with you 100% that I feel like emotions need to be discussed more and looked at more. And sometimes people don't have anybody to talk to. And you know what, I have been fortunate enough that I have people to talk to, but I feel extremely empathetic to people who don't have that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know what I would have done if it was not for the people I had around me when I fully broke down and just didn't know what was going on. Because especially when you're in a panic attack, you like go tunnel vision, like you go into like deer getting chased by a tiger mode, and like you don't even really recognize the environment around you. And I don't think people recognize the like impact that it has when you don't have someone to ground you, when you don't have someone to be like, you're fine, like your body's just freaking out right now, you're fine. And I think about the people alone that are just like stuck trying to solve that alone, and like that is a lot. And I think even in our fast-paced society we forget a lot of people. So it's nice to have, if there was a community out there that people just knew about,
Mm.
to connect with, and in case they don't have anyone that can just be like, you're fine, it's okay, like we can talk, like I'm here if you need me type of thing. Because
Mhm.
I think we forget how much of an impact that makes, especially when your brain's just like in its own world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's something too that I find, even for myself, you have those days where you feel like you're in that bubble and you're just stuck and you're walking around and it feels like everybody around you is just floating past you, essentially, and you're
Hmm.
just stuck in your own little world, and you're stuck with your own problems as well. And so you're just, feeling down, unimpressed with life, feeling separated from everyone else. But the biggest factor is that if you have that smile on your face, nobody's going to know. I feel like more people than not are going through that and just
Yep.
need someone to talk to, but are too scared to walk up to somebody to talk to them.
Yep.
Because especially post COVID now, like people are a little bit more standoffish with having
Oh
communication,
yeah.
especially if you're not in a social scenario where it's like, say, a networking event where you can just walk up
Yeah.
to somebody and you feel like you have an in. On the streets, or I guess, I mean, even in bars, sometimes people feel concerned or like apprehensive about
I did
approaching
notice
other
that.
people.
Yeah. I'm bad for that though. I'm part of the problem where I go to all the self checkouts. I literally pre-order food online and pick it up, because I forget how to have conversations with people since COVID, despite literally going to so many network events pre-COVID and so many events pre-COVID. But even at the bar this past weekend, I feel like people used to mingle more. I don't know if that's the age difference or if that's a time change, but nobody interacted. I'm such a people watcher, and no groups were like intermingling the way that they used to. Like you used to always see like one guy walk over and you're like, I'm watching this go down. But there was nothing. It was everyone stayed with whoever they showed up with. And I don't know if that's because people like don't know how to mix anymore, or we don't want to, or we feel like we don't need to. I mean, my friends made a good point. If you want to meet someone, you just go on the internet now. Like you don't need to talk to someone in a bar. So it's fascinating how it's changed and almost made us more isolated if you don't already know those channels to reach out to.
Well, and you lose that human connection, right?
Hmm.
On Hinge, you only get so much. And
Oh yeah.
you see one thing you don't like and you swipe left. Like it's
Yeah.
just immediate. You're like, He has a German Shepherd. I don't like German Shepherds.
Yeah, like it's
Just
so arbitrary too.
to be clear, I love German Shepherds. I love all dogs, but it was just an example.
It's like vibes weird. No,
Yeah.
it makes no sense.
But exactly though. And that's why I feel like being able to have those in-purpose person interactions and being able to, I don't know, work with others. Like
Yeah.
just have that, like working through a conversation. Just, hey, how are you? Let's talk about our days. Let's talk about what do you like to do in your life? And another thing too that I noticed is that people, the interactions are usually, okay, what do you do for work? Rather than how are you
Same.
doing? And
Yeah.
actually discussing genuinely what we're dealing with deep inside. Because I mean, let's be honest, like nobody wants to talk about that. And it's scary to
No.
talk about that because you feel like you're going to be judged.
Yeah.
Right.
You
It's like,
feel
oh,
like you're
well,
gonna be judged, feel like you're somehow gonna reveal a weakness. You're like, oh no, they're gonna know like I
too much
don't have
about
it all
me.
together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we keep it as like a guard in a
Mm-hmm.
way. I'm all for just telling people anything without fully trauma dumping on people, but like if someone's like, oh, this is so tragic, I'd be like, oh, I get that. Like I've done that too, like to make it less weird
Uncomfortable for
and
them.
less, yeah, yeah,
Well,
like,
and that's exactly it. Like active listening is huge. And I feel like
yeah.
that's something that needs to be talked about more. And for anyone who doesn't know what active listening is, it's exactly what it sounds like. You purely listen without commentary or judgment, and you give that person the space to be able to discuss what they need to discuss. Then you give them, I don't know, you make them feel like within a conversation, you can make someone feel like you're giving them a hug just by listening and being attentive to them. And I know it's one of the most beautiful things when you can give that to somebody.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can say I'm not as good as it as some of the other people I know. And like it's like being able to say, okay, who cares what my opinions are in this situation? Like, how would I feel if I was going through what you were going through and try to like, I feel like so much of society has made us feel so divisive and everything. And like, instead of you being like, hey, that was actually a good point. Like, I actually agree on that side. We're like taught to always fight back on everything of like, oh, I feel shitty today. Okay, well, I've never felt that way in my life. So like it's like we're taught to like automatically argue in a
Yeah,
way and like instead of just being like, oh, that I can see where you're coming from, whether or not you agree with that
it seems like
is
we're taught to respond rather than listen.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Yeah.
And so that's what active listening is rather than listening to respond, you listen and just be there for somebody. And yeah, it's way more difficult than what I'm saying right now. As I know personally, I put it in practice. Sometimes I'm like, oh, like to my girlfriends or whatever, I'll say something or they'll say something. And then I'm like, oh, I can relate to that. But it's like, wait a second, Sarah, like you're not relating right now. You're trying to actually just give them your time and make where they're coming from notable and understood.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, because a lot of people feel unheard.
Hmm. And unseen as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Yep.
that's a lot of us are craving to be seen and heard. And that's another big reason why I did want to start this podcast because I wanted to be able to give people a voice.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I think
Yeah.
there's a beauty in that. And I really enjoy being able to have these discussions with people such as yourself and being able to just let's talk about mental health, right? It's an
Oh, I
important
love it.
discussion. Yeah.
It's so valuable and so not talked about enough. And we need to add it to one of our conversation norms without making it planned response and actually just being like, okay, but how are you really? That's
Yeah.
the dream.
Yes. Well, we're working on it
We're
day by
getting
day.
there.
Yeah. I am going to end this Zoom. So guys,
Okay.
come back to us for part 2.